Great.
We can, and then you can start with your talk and so forth. So here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deborah Sloan. I am the president of the Northwest Ceramics Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you all to this presentation of Montreal artist Linda Swanson. But first, we have some housekeeping. The Northwest Ceramics Foundation is grateful for and acknowledges that it operates on land that is the unceded, shared traditional territories of the Coast Salish, including the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Yep. We stand in solidarity with all communities marginalized due to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or age, and commit ourselves to opposing racism in all its forms. For those not currently on our mailing list, we encourage you to go to our website, www.nwcf.ca. At the top of every page, there's a blue button. If you push on it, you can then apply for a newsletter or notifications. Our next speaker will be Eliza Au, who originally is from Vancouver, but now teaches in Texas. She'll be speaking on Sunday, April 6th, so please stay tuned. Please join our mailing list, and you'll get all these notifications. All of these events are free. Now, on another point, we are pleased to announce that applications for the Museum of Anthropology Ceramic Artist in Residence program, which is at the museum, which is in UBC in Vancouver, and this residency is supported both by NWCF and our board member, Carol Mayer. It is now open for, applications are open, deadline April 15th. So you can check MOA out on the internet and see what you think. For the duration of this talk, we'll ask you to mute yourselves and turn off your video. This improves the transmission. At the end of the talk, we will have a discussion period during which you can turn back your video on if you wish. You can type in questions in the chat function. Please note we are being recorded, and this recording will find its way onto our website, and it will stay there, and we're finding that we're getting hundreds of people looking at these recordings. So now at last, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Linda Swanson. Linda earned her MFA in ceramics from Alfred University in New York in 2005. Her interests as an artist are grounded in the metamorphic nature of ceramic materials and processes. Her raw clay installations and kiln-fired ceramics have been exhibited in North America, Europe, and Asia, including Raw at the Gardner Museum in Toronto, La Debacle at the Centre Materia in Quebec City, Design March in Reykjavik, Iceland, Beauties Aquavik. Linda, you can correct me. At the Bernardo Foundation in Limoges, and this spring at the Utah Museum of Art in Salt Lake City. Linda has been an artist in residence at the European Ceramic Work Center, the Guldegard International Ceramic Research Center, the Mid-Atlantic Ceramic Exchange in Iceland, and at Louisiana State University. She has taught at Alfred University and the Kansas City Art Institute, and currently is an associate professor of the studio arts at the Concordia University in Montreal, where she coordinates a ceramic program. And you can talk about being in Louisiana. So please welcome Linda Swanson. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone in the Northwest Ceramic Foundation for this invitation, especially to Amy Gogarty for reaching out to me and meeting me 16 years ago during her visit to Montreal when I was a visiting artist at Concordia when the first year I was there. And that's where I now teach in. And I've been grateful for Amy's generosity ever since that time. So nice to have all of you. I saw a few familiar faces before cameras went off, and I hope to have a nice chat with you after this presentation. So what you've been looking at is a sculpture of Mississippi clay from the banks of the Mississippi River. And as was just mentioned, I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Tornadoes have passed, thank goodness for the moment, so we should be okay. I'm gonna switch slides here and then switch the screen just a little bit. This is an aerial view of Montreal, also known as Jojage in Indigenous, the Indigenous name, which is unceded Indigenous lands and has traditionally been a gathering place for many First Nations. The Ganyankahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands on waters on which I live and work for most of the year. I'm an immigrant, a settler, and a visitor to these lands. This spoken acknowledgement is an act of respect for this territory and the Indigenous and other peoples who inhabit it. May it also serve as a reminder to myself to continually work toward abolishing the oppressive legacy of colonialism. My cursor is not working. There we go. Looks like I've got to adjust again. Sorry about that. Land and water are two important subjects in my work. As I mentioned, I split my time between Montreal and Louisiana, where my partner is now living, and in Baton Rouge, and I live near the Mississippi River. And you probably all know that Montreal is an island within the St. Lawrence River. Both places negotiate a delicate balance between land and water that is becoming more precarious with the climate crisis. One of the primary strategies I use in making work is observation. I like looking and I'm curious about how various aspects of our world might resemble each other, the way the previous river delta might look like this lava from a recent lava flow in Iceland, or the way it might even resemble an internal circulatory system. I'm interested in the ways that patterns in the natural world repeat on a large scale, at a small scale, in the land and in the body. And I want to draw my attention, our attention to this through my work. I want there to be a kind of live quality to my work, in a way, a kind of animated quality, whether the work is ephemeral and changing or fired and permanent. This is a simple composition of clay and water interacting. And I just want to mention a quote by an early geneticist who said that the world shall not perish from lack of wonders, but lack of wonder. And so this attitude of wonder or curiosity or fascination is something that I'm looking at drawing out in my work. So perhaps that can extend to that larger idea of the way we look at the world. So how those interactions take place between the various elements is the place where my work happens. So how big, how small, how far, how near, I'm setting up the conditions for these materials to act. And I'm looking for moments that capture this idea of curiosity. And this is one of those for me. This bentonite clay, as it's floating in water, creates these formations that visually draw parallels between the body and land, speaks to our own corporal reality and the way we ourselves are made of a material body and how we sense the world through this material body. At the top of this piece, some of the water is seeping out through a hole pierced down to the liquid, and the clay is slowly slaking down into the hole, which is a phenomena that maybe if everyone is a ceramicist in this room, which we might very well be, we all know very well. So it's just this everyday kind of ordinary event in the ceramic studio that I've framed in a certain way so that it draws our attention to really the kind of marvelous qualities in these materials. The way that clay particles aren't round, but they're flat. And the way you see that in this formation as those particles are slaking down layer by layer in the compressed clay. So French philosopher Michel Foucault stated aptly that Curiosity is a new vice that has been stigmatized in turn by Christianity, by philosophy, and even by a certain conception of science. Curiosity, futility. The word, however, pleases me. To me, it suggests something altogether different. It evokes concern. It evokes the care that one takes for what exists and what could exist, a readiness to find strange and singular what surrounds us, a certain relentlessness to break up our familiarities and to regard otherwise the same things. So eventually the clay swells in this vessel and fills the sphere after about 2 weeks. And when it's no longer changing, then the work is over. I thought I'd fast forward to my most recent installation that I finishing setting up in Michigan a couple of weeks ago. This is the first actually large scale installation I've done since 2020, which put a damper on this kind of traveling and working in person. But this exhibition in particular really represents these two modes of working that I do. And one of them is these raw materials that are transforming over time and fired ceramics. So for a bit of background, I began ceramics through pottery. I thought I would become a production potter, and I studied in Japan for several years. And it's through these travels and visiting gardens like this Zen garden at Ryoanji Temple that it dawned on me that we usually think of nature and culture as these separate ideas. But in fact, our idea of nature is a cultural process that you can see somehow in the composition of a garden. And what we make as human beings can help in mediating this relationship with the natural world. So what I'm trying to make is not actually replacing our experience of the natural world, but rather, in a way, it's sensitizing us, hopefully. So in Japan, I studied handmade pottery, and I also studied hand weaving. I developed a deep respect for the handmade object and the traditional relationship between the hand and material in making. And I came away thinking as well that what we usually think as the clay being malleable to our hand, taking the impression that we give it, there's also the reverse of that idea in that the clay has a certain resistance to the force that we impose upon it. And it's this kind of resistance that I've kind of allowed to increase and increase in my work. So whereas I started off forming things explicitly, more and more I've let the material do the forming and I set up the framework. And this came about when I returned to the US. I went back to school and I ended up in a mold making class. And I was so interested in the individuality of every object at that point in time, making things by hand in Japan, that it was of no interest to me to make anything repeated in a mold. So I started drawing with a casting slip on porcelain, making these grids. And what I liked about this drawing process is that no two grids would actually be completely repeatable. So there was always this influence of some aspect of chance in terms of the viscosity of the material, in terms of my movement. They were all grids, and I made quite a lot of them. But they weren't repeatable at a certain level. And I started making these large scale card houses. This one is about a little over 5 feet tall. It's my height. It was about 8 feet long. And I was interested in this encounter with the fragile nature of the material, the idea that potentially this could fall and break apart and be destroyed, almost kind of like a life cycle of the material. And then I started taking some of these grids and forming them into very regular geometry. So this piece was formed in a 5-gallon bucket. It was a perfect cylinder when it went into the kiln, and it was the time in the kiln, the heat in the kiln, and the way that gravity acted upon the material that ended up creating the form. And so this was how my work kind of started to shift to incorporate these other forces other than just my own. And at that point, I was fortunate to receive a study fellowship to go to Iceland. And in Iceland, I wanted to go and look for color. And this is a rainbow rhyolite mountain. This is literally a picture that I took in Iceland. There is the most fantastic colorscapes. It's really a place that seems like apart from this world. Anyway, I did find fantastic color and ideas. I really kind of fell in love with color. But what I also encountered when I was there was this interaction between earth and water that comprised and really animated the landscape. I mean, it was literally raining almost every day. The glaciers were melting, geysers were spewing. There was water kind of in action in relationship to all of these landscapes. This, for example, is Jettifoss waterfall. The water's moving at a rate of 650 meters a second. It's really just kind of incredible how quickly and how impressive and how forceful the natural world appeared. So Iceland is a place where nature really asserts itself. And this also kind of further imposed this idea about allowing the forces that are kind of inherent in the world to play upon the material. So it's the moments like these that I found the most kind of beautiful and moving. And when I came back to um, school, I wanted to use water then in my work. So the normal order of operations in ceramics is taking out water. So removing water, slow drying until we fire ceramics, and that's the permanent removal of water in the kiln. So I reversed that by adding it back in and really considering water to be a ceramic material. In fact, it's the element that makes ceramics possible, makes it formable, it makes it glazable, all of these things that we do with it. It's water that makes it possible. And so I set up a series of these interactions between the materials in the glaze lab and water. The ones that I was really interested in were the ones that seemed to change, like salts that formed crystals or clays that swell like bentonite, rather than the experiments that I did that related to erosion. It was less the idea of something breaking down than something actually changing that I became interested in. So solids dissolved and liquids solidified, and these different things were happening in the exhibition while it was going on. Some of them were extremely fast. So even within the time of the opening, if you walked back in half an hour or an hour, you would see some changes happening in these wet glazed material combinations. I wanted to share with you a little bit of an excerpt from a thinker named Ivan Illich and his book H2O in the Waters of Forgetfulness. In this book, he retells mythic stories that reanimate water culturally by telling these stories that had been passed on about how things happen mythologically. And he recounts the story of Mnemosyne, the spring that feeds the water that separates the living from the dead. So on the way to the other world, as the traveler in the Indo-Germanic mythic tradition departs this one, they must cross a river flowing along, which washes their memories from their feet. Their memories are not destroyed, but rather the river carries them back to the spring where they bubble up again. Privileged ones can access the spring and can drink from its waters. The epical singer, the prophet, some heroes, some seers, returning from a trip to a realm of the dead through a dream or a mystical journey, they bring these memories back to a world that needs them, for whom they constitute the greatest gift. The dead have no need for their memories, but they are of immense value to the living. The living depend on the memories from the bubbling pool of Nemesyene and the river Lethe, known as the stream of forgetfulness, who washes those who cross it. The river carries and nourishes the clear pond of remembrance, which is a community's greatest treasure. Nemesyene is the social birth of water, where water, the cosmic element, becomes a source of remembrance and culture. And so the way we think about these very familiar elements like water anew or reconsider them is something that I hope will come up in encountering my work as well. So metamorphosis is an idea that not only distinguishes those ephemeral pieces, but also work that I try to make in the fired state. So on the left here is one of those wet glaze tanks, and on the right is a fired ceramic piece. It's a crystalline glaze that has formed crystals during the firing process, and then it's in extreme tension, and so that those crazing lines are actually pretty continually uh, evolving. And they evolve for the most part within a week or two after firing, and then very, very slowly after that. So this series called Views is actually a whole lot of ceramic faults like those crazing lines. The piece is slumped from its original concave form as a kind of bowl shape. The colorants are in very small amounts, and so they separate out of the glaze matrix, and the surface is crazed, and crystals may or may not be considered a fault, but I don't know where they're going to appear, and they grow of their own accord. So in these faults, I'm trying to court something about material behavior, something beyond what I actually plan. So I'm interested in the colors and forms that kind of confuse geology and biology, like a mineral body or an organic landscape. And I want to kind of generate an optical sense of optical ambivalence. They're round to kind of confuse the scale. Either we're close up or far away. There's no top, there's no bottom. And this is the shape that we usually study the world through. So scientists are looking through lenses of microscopes and telescopes that are round like this. So outside the kiln, by utilizing water, some of these changes that happen in the kiln in those fired pieces can happen at ambient temperature, like crystallization, for example, where these things begin one way at the beginning of an exhibition and then shift to another to kind of escape our understanding of them. What distinguishes ceramic materials from other sculptural materials is this very ability to transform. And so even though this doesn't appear like a typical ceramic object, I do feel like ceramics is very much at the core of this practice because these are really demonstrating what the potential of the materials is. So again, this idea of looking and perhaps not knowing exactly what this is, or looking at it and seeing things that it might be related to, this idea of wonder is as a kind of sign of resistance between what we know and what we see. It's really the moment beyond that we're seeing something beyond what we know. And so what I'm trying to do through these installations is to place our sensory experience and perception in relationship with these materials and to engage with them on a perceptual level and to give a kind of experience that reacquaints us with the materiality in a physical way to complement what we already know about them abstractly through science. Some installations respond to the site. This is the Milwaukee Art Museum with the architecture of Santiago Calatrava that appears a lot like the belly of a whale with those ribs. Actually, the same term in architecture as in a whale, the support forms. And I thought that the hallway was really reminiscent of a body. It's also maybe reminiscent of a ship. I wanted the work to evoke these kind of missing processes of the body. So there was this kind of very fleshy, pinky color that emerged out of the clay as it absorbed the water that was dripping from up above. For this work in a small town in rural Ohio, I wanted to connect to that particular place through an agrarian reference. There's a lot of farmers around this area. And in ancient Roman times, there was an important ceremony in the founding of a town that involved the plowing of an initial furrow or the first furrow in the earth called the sulcus primigenius. This furrow, rather than for farming, delineated the territory of the new town as sacred when around the edge of the town. And so this installation represented that. And I'll describe that ceremony to you. Priests steered a pair of oxen, one female and one male, pulling a bronze plow angled so that the earth would fall inward toward the female ox to ensure the fertility of the city. In this boundary rite, plowing reverently enacted the holy marriage of earth and sky as a condition for human life and potential harmony with the cosmos. In the context of this exhibition called Material Histories, this work is an installation of a field of powdered bentonite inscribed with a single furrow that is watered. So instead of the water dripping, attendants actually regularly watered the furrow. In ancient cultures, tilling the earth possessed a ritual dimension, increasing and realizing its inherent fertility. As the clay absorbs liquid, it swells and erupts into a blossoming of earth whose potential is now distilled and concentrated through industrial processes. Yet the furrow is also an open wound, the violation of an otherwise inaccessible primeval order, if we hadn't interrupted it. Furrowing thus makes the necessary ambivalence of our relationship to, thus marks the necessary ambivalence of our relationship to nature and the inability within our technological worldview of acknowledging this ambivalence with a reverence that does not absolve or redeem us. Another installation that took place at the Gardner Museum in the context of the exhibition called Raw is this piece called Templum of a Precious Thing of No Value, a Shapeless Thing of Many Shapes. So in alchemy, there was this idea of prima materia, or the original material from which all things came. And this prima materia had many names, and one of them was a precious thing of no value. Another one was a shapeless thing of many shapes. Because it was such an amorphous idea, it had so many names. And so I wanted to kind of title this piece to liken to that idea of the origin from which all things come. Because I feel like we have a very profound relationship with clay. In fact, many myths describe our being formed out of clay. It's a material that's always been a part of our world. It's constantly in formation, just as we are. Scientists have shown that specific energetic properties found in clay minerals are key to forming life. And it's the only natural material that accepts the shape we give it by hand. How we engage it enables us to reflect on our existence in a distinctly human way. When we first understood that clay would hold its shape, we formed the oldest clay object that we know about is a Venus figurine. So we formed ourselves out of it rather than something for our use. Sometimes I combine these two aspects of my process that are temporal and more permanent. And this was one of those occasions. I was invited to do a piece for AB Projects, and which is a space that really supports work that is unconventional in ceramics. And it took place in Los Angeles, and that was my birth city. So I call this piece Omphalos, which means navel in Greek. And each of the vessels in the installation had this kind of like navel-like foot. And it also takes the kind of shape of an omphalos, which is an ancient form of sculpture that designated the center of the world. There was often an omphalos sculpture in homes in ancient Greece. And in this case, I used a digital drawing program to make the vessel to kind of center our maybe contemporary world in this kind of digital realm. I also was really interested in the idea of these are very tiny, they're very small vessels, but this idea that the clay could somehow kind of, this natural material could kind of mediate between us as social beings. So the way a natural material is kind of interjected into culture instead of the other way around. And the many pieces, kind of these many centers, these many navels, really maybe represent the kind of multifaceted centers of the world that we have today, kind of less centralized, decentralized maybe. And at the end, as the salts overtake and encrust the piece, there's kind of a stillness. So one of my ceramic heroes is Bernard Palissy. This is one of his table fountains. He was a French Renaissance potter, and this piece does not look hundreds of years old to me, which is still really amazing. Anyway, these table fountains apparently were filled with water and placed on a kind of banquet table, and as the table moved, the water would animate the would kind of jiggle, and the creatures would appear kind of alive as if they were moving within it. And I was really struck by that relationship that was happening between in these table fountains and in his larger grotto projects. I also had recently moved to Montreal, and at this point in 2009, and was walking through the city. Wasn't from a walkable city. Los Angeles is just not that way. And so it was really wonderful to kind of look through the city and discover. And I got inspired by an artist, Charles Simmons, who in the 1970s was making these small villages for what he called little people in Brooklyn. And so I wanted to do a public art piece that folks could discover as they kind of meandered. And I also had no connections in Montreal and kind of no place to make and show work. So this was also another way to just kind of stay productive and put work out there. I connected with an urban curator who was interested in doing interventions in the city. And we finally did get a permission from this location from Parks Canada to do this maybe like very, very imperceptible public art piece. So down on the ground of this site near the Lachine Canal in Montreal are the remains of the foundations of an early industrial building. This whole area was going through rampant redevelopment, and my studio was down in this area, and I wanted to draw attention to this kind of the beauty of the decay in the city. And so I made 1,000 slugs that could really kind of speak to the idea of regeneration and even spontaneous generation out of the canal, kind of out of putrid bodies of water. Um, and they appeared one morning at sunrise. I invited the public to come out and help me set them up. Not only was it a big job, but I just really wanted to involve the public in the ideas of the project. And because actually this view that I showed you a moment ago doesn't exist anymore. It's completely blocked by condominium development. So I wanted to draw attention to the idea of how we need decay for regeneration, and these places of historical, even small significance in a city are really important for the cultural imagination. So after we set up all the slugs, I mentioned it was dawn. I think it was about 8 o'clock, and the volunteers wanted to go get coffee. So that group went, and when they left, the birds came, and they thought we had just set out this really tasty banquet and started picking up the slugs and flying away and dropping them once they got about 10 feet in the air to crack them open and find something juicy inside. But they were sorely disappointed. and gave up after a few tries. So I was a little bit relieved about that, but it was maybe um, a little bit of um, confusion between art and life in a good way. So to finish the exhibition, I wanted the public to take the slugs away with them. I knew people who might happen upon the installation might take them away anyway. So I wanted to build this into the project that there was an invitation to come back at sunset the following week. And these then went on to further infest the city. After that, there was a call for an exhibition at the Canadian Centre for Architecture, A through Z Montreal. And I had just recently had a cockroach infestation in my house. And so I thought I would propose a kind of, if the pest of the garden was the slug, then the pest of architecture might be the cockroach. So I proposed this installation, but it didn't get accepted. Also, the Canadian Centre for Architecture, for those of you who don't know, is an archive, and so they're very kind of bug phobic, and they weren't afraid of these bugs. They just maybe didn't appreciate the humor. Anyway, it did get installed in another practice gallery in Philadelphia. And here there's this interplay between what is organic and what is inorganic. In fact, the cockroaches are really still, and it's the salts that are moving and crystallizing over their surfaces. There's a phenomena called salt creep, where the salt crystals kind of build one on top of each other, and they slowly entombed the little critters. So sometimes there are these kind of figures or these shapes in my work that kind of tap into the ideas of the project that also maybe have a little bit of fun in them to kind of appeal to um, us on a very kind of like very immediate level. This was a public art project that took place out in the countryside outside Montreal at an apple orchard. It was part of a pick your own orchard, pick your own apple farm type experience to go out there. And every year they have a land art competition where you need to use 95% of the materials found locally in the farm. And so I asked the farmer if there was clay, and sure enough, there was. And he pointed me to it. And then I dug a few pits and started the process of pit firing at 3 different times so that at the opening, which you're seeing here, the process would have been started in the middle and then also finished. And so the visitors could actually pick an apple and take it home. What I didn't realize would happen in this project, and is one of the kind of delightful aspects of doing installation, I think, is that the fire pits really acted like a campfire would, that folks gathered around it. It was a kind of chilly day, wanted to talk and meet each other and talk about the project. And it was really, this interaction was really a delightful, a really delightful aspect of making the work for me. In fact, during the week, some folks, because this is a municipally sponsored event, would come through and check on the progress of the dozen or so artists that were setting up the installation. So they actually got to see the progression and talk with us about it. Similarly, in my installation practice, I'm usually working with a team to install due to time constraints. And getting to know that team is a really wonderful aspect of doing the work that I do. I just in Michigan made a group of new friends and really carry that part of the work with me. So here are what the apples came out like, and it was a kind of fun thing for everyone of all ages. So as I mentioned, I really changed the way I worked from working in pottery, where I was manipulating clay by hand, to this embrace of kind of material phenomena. And I wanted to work on that through the kiln firing work a little bit more in depth, and I received the funding for a research project called Hot Alchemy, where we did blends of clay and glaze, and here's some of those results. It's at a website, hotalchemy.ca, and all these recipes are online, so you don't have to repeat them. That was part of the idea too, to kind of conserve on material testing. But basically, I wanted to find clay bodies that would move and then find glazes that would kind of take form. So these kind of strange moments would happen that were, unexpected in the process. So I'm currently turning my attention more and more to the source of the materials that I use. As many of us are in ceramics, we're getting concerned about the long distances that travel, that materials are shipped. Some materials are just disappearing in terms of depletion, and also just to be a kind of more responsible global citizen. So I started looking back at some of these sources on minerals, and you can see right on the title of this geological sketch is the connection to colonization in Canada, and outlined in this book are really colonial tactics for mineral exploitation in terms of you know charging for land and claiming procedures for making stakes for claims. And this is all playing into my consciousness in terms of and conscience in terms of the materials that I use. And part of the idea is to become more responsible for the practices around collecting materials. And so in searching for some of these materials, I've encountered some of these sites that really have been very destructive. This is a former quartz mine in northern Quebec, and those hillsides are so unstable that you can't enter into that area. It's extremely dangerous. Some of the sources that I'm looking at to share with you, wonderful book In the Aura of a Whole, Exploring Sites of Mineral Extraction by A. Laurie Palmer, who taught at the Chicago Art Institute, really looks into some of the stories around different materials and how they are extracted in the US. And then also Timefulness, how thinking like a geologist can help save the world, and thinking about how we think much more longer term than short term. Some of this material investigation has really dredged up some unfortunate stories that silica mine, or that quartz mine that I showed you a minute ago, is nearby this former kaolin mine in St. Remy of Amherst, where many of the men working in the mine died of silicosis from lack of safety protocols in the 1940s, 1950s. And this incident, this very unfortunate incident, did lead to the first labor laws in Quebec. So some of these material histories, material connections, and those stories, I'm hoping will come out further in the work. And my concern for these issues around sustainability, materials, led to my seeking out folks who are likewise concerned by them. And I joined the NCECA Green Task Force during the pandemic, and was very heavily involved for many years. And this led to a project that then I shifted from the Green Task Force to concentrating at my school on a project called Sustainable Studios, where we've been obtaining funding for students to give each other workshops around sustainable practices. So it seems the thing with sustainability is that it just takes more time. These steps take more time and they take more work. And it was hard for me to convince students to take these actions, but convincing students is a much stronger strategy. And also it's really heartening to see how many students care so deeply about these issues and want to help each other become kind of better studio stewards. I've also looked to other places for ideas in terms of sustainability and gone on certain residencies. Certainly, Denmark is a leader in terms of sustainable research. And I was fortunate to go several years ago on a residency to Gulyagor, where there is a tradition of wood firing. And I'm thinking of wood firing in terms of using wood as a renewable resource, especially in Quebec, where it is so plentiful. We could exclusively fire with waste wood if we, seek out the access for those kinds of things. So it's at Gulyagor where I've taken students now back a few times that I've been gaining some skills to expand this idea of using wood as a renewable resource. Here's some of the work that's come out of these kilns again, these ideas of how I might connect sculptural forms to aspects of the body without being kind of explicitly figurative, but through the forms and through the colors. And then I was fortunate to join a wood firing group in Quebec called the Goragama Kiln Crew. And we're working with an Onagama kiln that was built prior to my joining the group. And I'm looking forward to trying more strategies with sustainable wood firing. And to that end, with students, we've been going up to a site in northern Quebec called Three Ecologies, where we've been trying out rocket kilns, which I'm sure some of you have heard about, using these defunct electric kilns, taking a waste kiln out of the waste stream, and then setting up a burner system based on the rocket stove, very efficient rocket stove that also is kind of smokeless process. Oh, this, by the way, is Teresa and Daniel, and we rebuilt a rocket kiln on the grounds of the Clay Museum in Denmark last November. So we think we might have built the first rocket kiln in Denmark. Another residency that I was fortunate to participate in is the Mid-Atlantic Ceramic Exchange. It's run by Andy Shaw, who's teaching in North Carolina now, and Lena Orswala, who is teaching ceramics in Reykjavik. And they had a brilliant idea to bring artists from North America and artists from Europe together to meet in Iceland and exchange around their practices for 2 weeks. And I wanted to mention this residency because it's really completely different than any other residency that I've applied to or heard about. It was two brilliant ceramic artists who had an idea that there wasn't enough exchange between North America and Europe. And they basically set up the residency themselves, invited the artists that they knew, that they didn't know, to come and kind of expand their network of people and knowledge. I thought it was a really beautiful idea. Felt really fortunate to be a part of it. And out of that exchange, which was really brief, it was 2 weeks, I became a part of a group called Glazed Dialogue, which is a group of primarily Nordic artists that I met during the Make residency. And we're meeting on Zoom, like this talk today, to talk about experimenting in glaze. And the idea initially was, what would artists and designers do if we all had the same glaze? Kind of how would that glaze look different? But after we met, we realized that my being in Canada, folks being in Iceland, in Denmark, in various locations, we actually couldn't make the same glaze because we had different ingredients. And so this problem kind of became what we started to explore in terms of these differences. We came up with a kind of proportional framework for materials based on ancient Chinese glazes, 4321. And then we started making variations and sharing those. And this was the exhibition in Reykjavik where we did meet together. Many of the folks I met for the first time in person there, since we had been on Zoom, and shared the results. And it was just really a fascinating exchange for us. I think also the public, who this exhibition gave us the opportunity to really explain and talk about the ceramic surface with the public, and we got a really spectacular response. One more residency that I was able to do that I wanted to share with you was the European Ceramic Work Center. I went in 2020 in this strange window at the end of summer when we could travel just very briefly, and then things kind of closed up again. So living there was like living in a kind of art monastery during the pandemic. But if you haven't seen pictures of the kiln room, I wanted to share this with you. It's just really an incredible facility. You can make very, very large scale work there. And there is a team of technicians who help artists, designers, architects realize their dream in ceramics. It's kind of like Dutch engineering meets ceramics and dreams all together. So my project there was to make these very large scale porcelain tiles. I was introduced to a lot of techniques that I didn't know. I felt like I was a student again. These technicians were really brilliant and open to helping me, kind of try things out. This is a method called plimping, if you haven't heard of it before. It's a kind of very thick slip. It's very slightly deflocculated. It's got porcelain grog in it and also some paper. And you spread it out on fabric. And this was a larger one that we did, this kind of an amalgamation of images. I thought I'd put a little nerdy demonstration of making in this talk with all of the ceramicists here. And so then we scraped the top of that, kind of almost like frosting, but just like a little bit thicker. And then it slowly dries, and that fabric underneath is able to allow it to shrink enough. And then we pulled the fabric onto this palette. The palette itself also, it has to be fabricated because it has to stay perfectly flat. Really, these technicians have figured out so much of the way these things work. Of course, the artists are making the palette, but they're, kind of advising you, you've got to make this. Otherwise, even the wood would, kind of warp this large porcelain piece. Then you make a second palette to flip this over and slide that off, and then using the forklift to kind of load the kiln, we'd stack up these flat porcelain tiles that I was making and load them into the kiln that way. This was the final kiln on the right, this elevator kiln with the top that comes down over the work. And these pieces were fired at a slight angle so the materials would kind of flow down and again kind of take their own formation on the surface. So they were made with a kind of pointillistic technique. There's about 50 different glazes on here, just applied with a kind of small dots, and then they blend into that surface. Just a couple other, the artists, which is, the real delight about doing a residency. Not only do you get to kind of focus on your own work, but you get to meet a series of artists who are really ambitious and wonderful. So Boris on the left here, Julie on the right, and Isabel here making very, very large scale porous ceramics that then would have these kind of liquid crystals grow out of them. Another wonderful artist, Kim Habers, using this casting tape type material, Caraflex, to make these large scale drawings. So the many of the techniques developed at the European Ceramic Work Center are organized in this book by Anton Rangiers, The Ceramic Process, and then, this technical know-how meets kind of Dutch Frank humor at this residency. It was a really wonderful time. Finally, one other group that I became a part of during the pandemic, maybe that was a kind of theme in this talk too. I joined quite a lot of groups during that time, reaching out and kind of connecting with other artists to kind of get out of isolation. Was a group of 4 artists who are working in raw clay, and all of our practices were really stymied by the pandemic. So we created we met monthly or bi-monthly, and it was really an energizing experience to talk with each other about what we were doing. And we started finding all of these themes in our work that we then translated into this mind map type organization and created time-based videos that are uploaded to this website that became a kind of exhibition through NSICA. The first video that I was showing at the beginning of the talk came from this site. So the members of Collective Trace, which we named ourselves, are Yuan Dong in China and Magdalene Dijkstra in Canada with me, and Nicole Seisler, who's now in Portland. And so this material QR code is actually scannable and can get you to the exhibition online. I also wanted to mention that the research coming out of the Sustainable Studios initiative at my school is of a research presentation this week at Concordia that's streamed live online called the Insight to Sustainability Across Disciplines. This is really small for you to see, but that's the schedule. And you can look that up on Concordia's website. And hopefully some of you might join us if you're further interested in sustainable initiatives. We'll delve into those a little bit deeper in that talk tomorrow. It's at 2:45 Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to stop the share there. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope it hasn't been too long of an hour.
Thank you. Everyone, if you want, you can turn your videos. I believe you can turn your own videos and sound back on. And please feel free to ask questions of Linda. I'm sort of, my mind is swirling because of the delicacy of the little interconnections that you have been making. And so please, everyone, you can join up and join the conversation.
I have a question. Linda, so much of your work is very much focused on things that are visual. We can visually watch it. I'm not sure. I mean, I've got my thing there. I'm wondering, because I'm sure within these installations, there's sound, water dripping, smell, because clay smells a certain way. And I'm wondering how you sort of conceptualize the other sensory aspects of these installations, because of course you want to come and touch them, but other than things like the snails, you can't. So I'm just wondering how you consider other senses in them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes they can kind of tap into our other senses, our sense of touch, even just because we're accustomed to these materials. So there is that kind of appeal, that kind of familiarity we have with material. But I don't think that there's any other sense other than sound that plays into them. And sometimes they're also really quite silent. But the pieces that are dripping, if it's quiet in the gallery, you can hear this very soft kind of dripping sound. And maybe it was surprising in the Gardner because maybe the drops were going so far because the ceiling was so high, they got a bit louder. So you could hear them, and their pacing is it's kind of like a pulse. So I think in that sense, maybe they hearken a little bit to that idea again of the body. Um, but they are maybe truly a kind of primarily visual experience. And uh, I don't think the clay smells really strong enough. I'm trying to think of that now, like kind of in hindsight. But
I know in my studio, my clay really smells.
yeah, yeah. Well, the funny thing is that more recently I've been using local materials, but a lot of these installations are made with, completely industrially refined clays. And so they're cleaned and the organic matter is very minimal in them and that kind of thing. So, so part of what I'm trying to do is kind of re-engender them with a kind of like naturalness because they've been so refined. Um, But that's a really interesting question, Amy.
I
Thank you.
just thought of that with seeing them. So thanks.
Are there any other questions?
Or comments. If you don't have a question, that's okay too.
You mentioned a book, Ivan, and I didn't catch the name of the book. Could it be typed out or put in the?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll do that. It's H2O and the Waters of Forgetfulness.
I could, oops.
That's Ivan
Oh, yes, sure. Ivan Illich.
Illich. Ah, yeah, it makes sense, right?
Hi, Ben.
It's so good to hear you again. I love it. Um, the I've listened to you talk countless times, including that fabulous Sika glaze chemistry talk that you gave. That was remarkable. Your students are so blessed. Um, what I, what do you, I know you're in Louisiana now, right? Is that right? Or
This
you will
semester.
be? You will be, yeah. Um, what do you think is, in light of where the world is turning, um, what do you think you'll be, what do you think forms, what do you think, what forms may be taking shape for you in the future?
That's a really good question. Um, it's actually something I've been thinking about, maybe less in relation to kind of geopolitics. Then maybe it is about kind of getting older, right? And I may not be as agile as I once was to do large scale installations and that kind of thing. But what I really am finding wonderful about ceramics uh, and some of these projects that I've been involved in is the community. And we all know that's a kind of wonderful quality of ceramics is that we're often gathered around our facilities and cooperating with each other. And it is kind of a respite to be in that kind of community in these kinds of times.
Yeah,
So um, the wood firing groups, the sustainability groups, these kinds of groups are part of yeah, maybe what will carry me through this kind of
amen.
these times.
All right. All right.
There's a great deal of connectivity, which could also be discovered in the clay and the materials as you've been using them too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see such a material based, such an investigation of the natures of the materials. It's really interesting, and that from what you've shown us, there's been not too many inert objects, but mainly active ones. Yeah. Do you think in your aging, would you return, would you return to more inert in that it's less demanding perhaps, or maybe seen as a resolution, forms of resolutions to the ideas you've been working on for so many years? Is that
Yeah,
ever?
definitely not as hard on my knees, that's for sure. But I think why I always kept firing, even when I was really doing a lot of installation work or kind of primarily, is I also really like to have objects that stay around, right? That kind of like do have that I can refer to, that isn't that always disappearing on me.
Yes.
Um, so I do like that more and more actually. But what I really um, do carry between the two kinds of ways of working is this influence of either the materials or the process in the final work. so that it's not completely, kind of dictated by me. And it's what I really love about this kind of courting of the unpredictability of a wood firing, and not necessarily to get to know the kiln so well that I know exactly what it will do. I kind of don't want to know that. Like, I really want um, maintain that element of kind of discovery,
Yeah.
which is the thing that happens each time I make an installation for the viewer, but also for me, since it's in relation to these new conditions and this new scale and that kind of thing. So, um,
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about ceramics is that if fired and resolved, they last at least in fragments, and they are a record of what you've done. And yet at the same time, I love this idea of extending the notion of chance and power and empowering the material and looking at those prospects. Now I see a question, I think, from Amy Duval. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about your perspective on the importance of community and collaboration in the field of ceramics. Okay, and how that has developed through your residency experiences.
yeah, well, I really feel like the residency experience is a very special one for exchange once you're no longer in school. I'm quite fortunate. I'm super fortunate that we have artists come through as part of our program and that I have that kind of exchange with them as well as all of my students. But going to a residency is really a kind of intensified version of that, where you're living together and talking to each other about your work, kind of sharing the disappointments, sharing techniques and how to figure things out. It's a really special time because you're separated from all of your daily obligations of life. And it's really a rare gem of an experience to be in a residency. If you can, yeah, turn off that email and leave the phone in your room when you go to the studio and just be present there. And I think that sense of presence is something that is ever more precious to us in the technological world that we live in. And I think residency is one of those places where you have that kind of acute sense of presence with other artists. So that's a very beautiful moment to share together.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's a real privilege. Ever been tempted to go to the International Ceramic Studio in Hungary?
Very tempted. Yeah, I had a little one when I was in graduate school that I raised afterwards. So it's only kind of in the last 10 years that I've gone to residencies.
Yeah.
So I stayed home and I raised her during that period. So this has been, a kind of relatively late discovery for me, but I that it is so important, beneficial, and this is part of the reason why I really wanted to build that into my students' experience so that they knew early on how important and how generative a residency experience can be, and so that they don't wait as long as I did.
Well, it's life, right? It's hard to get away. Yeah, yeah. So, has anybody else got a comment, question uh, to give us?
I just want to say the talk was fantastic. Every time I see your work, I'm just amazed at how you think of ceramics almost from the inside out. It turns all of my understanding of ceramics inside out. It makes me think about it in such a different way. And we are really, really privileged to have you come speak, because it's one thing to read about it, it's one thing to see a picture, but to hear you speak about it so passionately is really a treat. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to
Thank you.
second that because I feel like I've been given so many unexpected insights,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I need to think about it.
I want to watch the recording. I can't
I mean,
wait.
this is recorded, and it'll take a week or two,
Yeah.
but it will turn up on our website. And I just think there's just so much to think about. I really love some of these ideas a lot. Yeah. So thank you. And I guess if there are no other questions, we should let you go. And hopefully no more cyclones and tornadoes and hurricanes.
Hopefully not. We don't need that much unpredictability.
Oh, I see a question from Amelia
Oh,
McDonald.
sure.
Amelia?
Oh, no, I don't have a question.
Oh.
I just was saying thank you.
Oh.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right.
thanks to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There are a lot of comments, Linda, so I hope you do get a chance to read them.
Yeah.
They're
Yes,
that are written.
I'm looking through them. Thank you so much, everyone. It's really, really wonderful to be here with you today. And thank you for the kind comments. They're really much appreciated.
Okay. So I will end the meeting and
Oh,
thank you
goodbye.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye, sweetheart.
Yeah,
Bye.
namaste.
Okay.
Stay.
That was great.